Welcome to U.S. Law Shield webinar. We're talking traveling. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sam Malone in Houston, Texas, a proud member for many years of U.S. Law Shield legal defense for self-defense. Remember, when you are part of that U.S. Law Shield family, you're a member. Number one thing, 24/7, 365 access to an attorney-answered emergency hotline. The independent program attorney in your state. I'm in Texas. I would talk to a Texas independent program attorney. You're in Colorado, New Jersey. Yep, it's that simple. Become a member at any time during our webinar, uslawshield.com. Become a proud member. Get that card in your wallet. I wear the shirt with pride all the time. Today, we're going to be talking about traveling, of course, with the summer here. Memorial Day's behind us. It's time to get in the car. States open up. And go hit some beaches, hit some parks, go visit. Now, the thing is, when you get behind the wheel of your automobile, you have your driver's license, right? Okay. You have your concealed carry permit. Guess what? They don't work the same. A driver's license, as you know, I'm in Texas. I could fly to New York, drive there, rent a car. I could drive that rental car from New York to Los Angeles, no problems. The difference is your concealed carry weapons permit could be awesome and allow you to legally carry in one state and just be a worthless piece of plastic in another. So if you're going to travel, listen up, okay? There's obviously good reasons to have a gun with you when you travel this summer. That's stating the obvious. But there are roadblocks, metaphorically, and mistakes that people make. That's going to be our topic on our webinar. We'll talk to independent program attorneys in Louisiana and Florida. After that, we'll get Dr. Emisfar stopping by with an MD's perspective on staying healthy while traveling. And of course, we'll get to your questions real easily with Emily and Richard. But first, let me introduce our panel for our first segment, independent program attorney in the Cajun State, James Reeves. James, thanks for joining us. Good to have you aboard. James, can you hear me okay? Okay, David Katz is standing there on screen. Mr. Katz, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing fine, and I can hear you loud and clear, Sam.
Hey, good. Mr. Reeves, you were there a second ago. Can you hear us okay? All right, well, just when you get back to us. Mr. Katz, let's open up with you. You are in Florida, in the great Sunshine State. So obviously, some of the rules and regs are going to be a little different than right here in Texas. But let's start with this. I'm traveling in my car. I'm in Texas. I got my Texas now called license to carry, and I don't leave Texas. I'm just driving around Texas. I got nothing to worry about. Right, Mr. Katz?
That's right. As long as you follow your state's laws, you've got a license to carry from your state, you're good to go.
Okay. Now, I'm in my state. I don't know. I want to leave. I want to go somewhere else. What do I need to know when it comes to reciprocity, reciprocal agreements that we have in Texas with other states? Mr. Katz.
So the most important thing is, A, to know if you have reciprocity with the state that you're traveling to. And if you do, you have to remember that the laws of your home state don't apply the moment you leave your state. So if you're visiting Florida, even if we have reciprocity with you, you have to follow Florida law. So knowing the laws of your destination, and quite honestly, all the states you're traveling through, very, very important.
David Katz, independent program attorney in Florida. Mr. Reeves, we had you there a second ago. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah. Sorry about that. It's, of course, like as soon as we go on, mic shuts off, headset shuts off. We're good now. Sorry about that.
That's what we in Texas call a cool feeling. All right, so you're in Louisiana. I'm in Texas, Mr. Reeves. Obviously, we have a reciprocal agreement, but I go to a state that doesn't. I still need to carry my gun. Talk to me. What should I know?
Well, you should check the local laws. You have some states that are constitutional carry, like, for example, one state over, Mississippi, they're a constitutional carry state. So it may not be such an issue if you go to a place like Mississippi, even if there's no reciprocity per se. There There are some states that they won't have reciprocity because they can't have reciprocity because they don't issue permits. So it really does vary state to state, and you should definitely do your homework and try to figure it out before you travel. Now, Sam, I know you lost me for a little bit there when we were talking about traveling within your state domestically. So you asked Dave about, say, Texas. And in Texas, I'm sure you're not going to have a problem going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Now, in Louisiana right now, for example, there are some differences between parish to parish to parish that preemption doesn't cover. So we may all be familiar with preemption statutes that say, like, a municipality or a city can't make laws, concealed handgun laws or firearm laws, that are more restrictive than the state's general laws. We have that in Louisiana, but there were certain exceptions where it said, look, like religious sites or certain civic buildings, they could set their own rules, that is, parishes and cities. Now there's a bill that just, I believe, advanced out of a House committee that's going to change that. So even if you're in a relatively gun-friendly state and you're traveling within the state, it's also a good idea just to be familiar with your preemption laws and maybe what restrictions might apply, prohibited locations, within your own state.
All right, well, how's this, Mr. Reeves? Staying in your state of Louisiana, very gun-friendly for the most part. But in other states that aren't, can I just go, oh, no, I got to have it. Got to have my gun. Castle Doctrine, as I yell out the window to the police officer in a gun-unfriendly state. Mr. Reeves, Castle Doctrine, is that my get-out-of-jail card?
I mean, it really depends on a lot of factors. And again, it's one of those things, this is so complicated. And what I hate is people, they see the Second Amendment, they see the Constitution, they're like, okay, this is cut and dry. I can do generally whatever I want. And that's not the case, as many of us know. So you may be going to a state where they don't have the Castle Doctrine at all. You may be going to a state where they recognize a vehicle as an extension of your home, and the Castle Doctrine would apply. But the important thing is, do your research before you decide to do that.
Outstanding. James Reeves in Louisiana. Let me jump over to David Katz, independent program attorney, an experienced professional with U.S. Law Shield I've known for years. What is a good thing to know about the Safe Passage Act when in unfriendly Second Amendment states, Mr. Katz?
Well, so there is a federal law that is commonly known as the Safe Passage Act that will allow you to take your firearms through even those unfriendly states. But you've got to know that you can't have a state as your final destination where you're not allowed to have that gun. You have to legally be able to possess your firearm at the beginning of your journey and at the end of your journey for the Safe Passage Act to even apply. And if you're in one of those unfriendly states, you're not allowed to be stopping there. You have to be traveling through it. Okay, so we've even heard of cases of a woman who broke down in New Jersey, and when she was changing her tire, a New Jersey trooper stopped behind her to help her, which was a great thing for an officer to do. But while they were unloading her trunk to get to the spare tire, he saw a gun case, and he arrested her for illegally having that gun in New Jersey, although her intention was only to pass through the state. And, she ended up having to go to court for it and spend time in jail.
That is wrong on many levels. I want to say hi to Bo watching us real quick in Philadelphia. Dave is here in Houston watching us. Brian's in Kansas City. Very cool. Zach is in Virginia. Good to have you aboard and watching us. And coming up, we will get some of your questions. Let me get back to Mr. Katz and the concept of traveling. And this summer, we go on a trip and I don't drive. I don't know, I'll take a bus or I'll get on a train. But once again, it makes perfect sense to bring my gun along. What should I know, Mr. Katz, in Florida about traveling on trains and buses, for instance?
So first, let's talk about getting here. Amtrak has unique rules, which you would definitely have to check with their rules. But I know that you're not allowed to have a firearm on an Amtrak train. And I believe that that's a federal law specific for Amtrak. However, in Florida on common carriers, you are allowed to have a firearm. They just can't be in your manual possession. They can't be in your hand or in the bag that you're carrying. But they could be like with your checked luggage under the bus. That would be legal.
Got it. Let me jump over to Mr. Reeves in Louisiana. Uber is very popular. Many of us use it. It's our amazing mode of transportation when we're in different cities. But I'm in maybe an unfriendly state when it comes to Second Amendment, or maybe I'm in a great 2A state like Louisiana or Texas. What do I need to know, Mr. Reeves in Louisiana?
See, Ubers are a pretty tricky thing, and a lot of that is still developing just because of how new, and I mean the jurisprudence is developing and the application of the law to doing exactly that. So it's tricky because in Louisiana, a vehicle it's seen often as an extension of your home. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but the castle doctrine applies to your vehicle. Well, you're not able to carry a gun into somebody else's home without their permission. So whether or not, when you hop into an Uber, if that's seen as carrying a gun into somebody else's home, you could be in a lot of trouble. If I could, Sam, really quick on the safe passage law for people who may not be aware of it, I've actually got, I think, a pretty appropriate story. Those of us who are into the shooting community, into training, we all know Thunder Ranch. If you fly into Thunder Ranch, at least from Louisiana, the easiest way to get there is to fly into Reno, Nevada, very gun-friendly state, right? You can bring just about anything there. And if you're going to bring your gun to Thunder Ranch, the fastest way to get there, which is in Lakeview, Oregon, is to actually cut through California and go north. So, of course, a very gun-unfriendly state. Now, the important thing is, I don't want anyone to get pulled over and say, hey, we've got 18 U.S. Code 926A, the Interstate Transportation of Firearms law officer. They're going to look at you and be like, what the hell is this guy talking about? But the Safe Passage Act, you have to keep the firearm in a compartment separate from the driver's compartment, and firearm and the ammunition must also be in a locked container separate from each other than the glove compartment or in the console. So for you guys out there who, said, okay, cool, Safe Passage Act, that's awesome. So I can just throw my AR-15 in the back seat along with the kid carrier and go on my way. Yeah, you can't do it. So there are specific, and it's a very concise code article. Again, it's 18 U.S. Code 926A. Just go check it out before you decide to start driving cross country, with your AR.
God, I did not know that. James Reeves, independent program attorney in Louisiana. I got another question for you. Stand by. But everyone watching our webinar across America, Ashton's in Florida, Derek's watching us in Madison, Wisconsin, Courtney's in Hamilton, New Jersey, Gary's in Lincoln, Nebraska. You're all watching. Are you members? Become a member. uslawshield.com, the leading legal defense for self-defense program in the country. I'm a proud member of many years. Going back to you, Mr. Reeves in Louisiana, independent program attorney. Obviously, you cannot bring a gun on an airplane, but I'm going to travel. I'm going to fly. It's got to be crazy to do it, but I'm going to check my gun as luggage onto the plane. What do I need to know? What are important details, James?
Well, fortunately, it's very well set out on the TSA's website. So you can go to the TSA and it'll tell you what you need to do to check a firearm. First of all, make sure, of course, you're complying with the law of the state that you're traveling to. Declare it. That's the important thing. So you just go up, and I've done this tons and tons of times, especially my wife and I do a lot of traveling domestically. I'll take my gun with me just about everywhere. You go up, you declare it. You say, hey, I've got a firearm. It's in my checked baggage. Sometimes the reaction that you get from the person behind the desk is a little bit less than familiar. We'll say, sometimes people kind of freak out a little bit. Their eyes get wide. But almost every airline has a process for it, and I'll get to that in just a second. But you declare it. It's got to be unloaded, and it's got to be locked in a hard-sided container and transported as checked baggage only. Can't have a live round in it. You can't even have ammunition in the magazine. You can bring ammo with you. Parts, ammo can travel along. Of course, you can't bring it in your carry-on baggage, but you can carry it in your checked baggage. Again, you have to make sure that it's all locked. A funny thing, I was coming back from T1G, Tier 1 group in Arkansas, and I had actually, this was 10, 15 years ago, before I was even a lawyer. And I had some AR-15 magazines, and I figured, not a big deal, in my carry-on luggage. And they were like, "What the hell is this, man?" So I got in a little bit of trouble. Fortunately, they let me get on my flight, and that was the last I ever heard of it. But they took my mags. Now, that said, you also have to make sure that whenever you fly with any specific carrier, check their rules too. Because some of them, I believe, like Alaska Airlines, I think they limit you to like 50 rounds. Delta, which you go to their website, and I'm looking at it right now, and it says no more than 11 pounds of ammunition, including the case. I don't know where they got to 11 pounds. I would love to know the conversation where 11 pounds, like how that came up, but no more than 11 pounds. And they even have like caliber requirements on there. Obviously, they don't want you bringing like a JDAM on the plane. So, they've got like a caliber limitation. Another thing that kind of cracks me up in the Delta regulations, they talk about accessories, including pistol telescopes. Not saying that that's wrong, just maybe kind of a weird way to say an optic for a pistol. But in any event, so that's pretty much everything you need to know. But go check. You're not going to remember that. You're not going to remember everything I just said. Go to the TSA's website, check it out there. It'll give you the whole procedure. And then go to your airline's website before you fly. Check their specific provisions before you try to board a plane with a gun in your checked baggage.
James Reeves, independent program attorney in Louisiana. Real quick with you, Mr. Reeves, before I get to Mr. Katz. So in most cases, I do not have to field strip the weapon, take it apart. I can still leave the weapon assembled as long as it's in that locked plastic container, a hardened plastic container, and it's not near the ammo.
100% correct. But, it is funny. Like one time I brought one that had an empty magazine inserted. There's nothing that prevents you from having a magazine inserted into like a Glock. But the lady at the desk said, "Oh, you got to take that clip out." Called it a clip. You got to take that. And yes, ma'am, just take it out, put it aside, whatever. But yeah, that's right.
Got it. Let me jump over to David Katz in the sunshine, beautiful state of Florida. Okay, so Mr. Reeves says you declare it, you make sure it's locked in its hardened container, and you don't leave, quote, the clip, which women have in their hair. You don't leave the clip in there. Separate the ammo. But I'm traveling to, I don't know, your state, Florida, but I get diverted, bad weather, land in New York, and they don't really embrace 2A like us. What do I need to know, Mr. Katz, when, quote, getting diverted into an unfriendly 2A state?
So that's great that you asked me that. I actually wrote the word diverted down on a piece of paper here because if James didn't hit it, I was going to add to it. It's extremely important, and we've actually, had members arrested. If you get diverted, we'll use New York as the example, into the city at one of the airports there. You want to make sure that when your baggage comes on the baggage claim, you don't take it off of the belt with your firearm in it. We have literally had the police waiting and watching for a bag to be taken off of the belt and move in to arrest the person for illegally possessing a firearm in the city of New York. Okay, so what you need to do is, if you get diverted, make the airline retain possession of your bag. And that may be difficult because you have stuff in it you need, but if you're going to be at the airport or stuck in the city, you cannot take possession of that bag and that weapon without risking arrest and going to jail. And we've had members have that happen.
That is insane. So I want the airline to take possession of the bag because I'm in an unfriendly 2A state like New York, but it's cold and my sweater's in there or my toothbrush or what have you, and you're saying let them take it versus you getting arrested.
Buy another toothbrush. It's a lot cheaper than a lawyer and a free trip or silver bracelets.
Well said, well said. Now, should you need legal defense for self-defense, as Mr. Katz is talking about, Mr. Reeves, become a member. US Law Shield, uslawshield.com. You get 24/7, 365 attorney answered emergency hotline. So if this should happen, emergency hotline, independent program attorneys in your state. I'm in Texas. I have, Texas independent program attorneys. You're in Louisiana, Florida, California, Colorado, wherever. These are experienced professionals. And of course, with your membership, you get FaceTime with independent program attorneys at events. You'll meet and talk to instructors. There's member only events. Of course, there's tactical training, there's discounts. Check it out. Go online, uslawshield.com. Become a member. Mr. Katz, final question, and then one more for you, Mr. Reeves. What are the top most common mistakes that people make when they're traveling and they have their Glock, their Beretta, their SIG on them? Top common mistakes, Mr. Katz.
Also, unfortunately, thousands of times a year, people carry firearms through and into the TSA checkpoint. And, I'm going to tell everyone, if you do that mistakenly, there are times where people, I threw my gun in my gym bag and then I didn't remember that it was in there. And when I had to go on a quick trip, I just used the gym bag, and they accidentally bring the gun to the airport and put it on the conveyor belt. Well, that normally we tell people, you have a right to remain silent, and you should. In my opinion, and Mr. Reeves may disagree and feel free, to say so, but in my opinion, if you put that bag on the conveyor belt at TSA, they've got you on film doing it. They know it's your bag. That's the time to talk, and that's the time to be apologetic. Repeatedly say you didn't know that the gun was in there, because at least in Florida, intent is part of carrying a firearm into a place, and federally, you have to intend to carry your firearm where you're not allowed to there. And if you can put on the record repeatedly that you had no intent to do it and it was an accident, it's going to help you in the long run. It's the time to be contrite, apologetic, and truly embarrassed and horrified by your mistake. We've had people, react like that, and the consequences are far, far less.
Wow, that's scary. I could see it happening. Mr. Reeves, final thoughts, and jump onto that topic that Mr. Katz brought up about most common mistakes traveling with your firearm.
Oh, I want to continue down this path because it is, Dave, you hit on a great one. I did a video, if you guys want to go search for it, TFB TV. I think it was the top 10 airports for gun seizures. You'd be shocked at how many airlines or how many airports are seizing guns and how many they're seizing a year. I've had to defend concealed handgun permit holders who have carried through TSA checkpoints in the past. If you handle it correctly, and I totally agree with you, Dave. I mean, that's when you just, if you exercise your right to remain silent, people might get frustrated. You might spend the night in jail. There's a saying, you can beat the charge, but you can't beat the ride. It might be the time to talk, and then the consequences could be minimized. Now, two very important points TSA attorneys have given me in the past. One thing they say, anytime you put a gun in your bag, get like a red carabiner or something. Snap it on that bag. That way you know there's a gun in the bag, and don't take that carabiner off until the gun comes out of the bag. That came straight from TSA, Counsel for TSA. I thought that was cool. Another thing, even if you as soon as you put that gun on the bag, as soon as you put that bag on the conveyor belt, if you say, hey, guys, man, I'm so sorry, I've got a gun on here. I've got to go take it to the car. At that point, it's too late. They say that they see that as like soft security testing. You know what I mean? I'm sure there's a term for it that I just butchered, but that's you probing security. So you're not going to get off the hook, even if you set it on the conveyor belt and you remember right then and there. So remember before you get there.
Love it. James Reeves, independent program attorney in Louisiana. Our good friend David Katz, independent program attorney in Florida. Experienced professionals, and these are the men and women, of course, who answer that 24/7, 365 attorney-answered emergency hotline. Mr. Reeves, thank you so much for joining us on our U.S. Law Shield webinar.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. Thanks, Sam. Take care.
Mr. Katz, as always, thank you for joining us as well. Both of y'all, have a blessed day.
Hey, Sam, have you got 1 second for some good news?
Oh, we love good news. Go ahead.
All right.
Bring it
So
back
for
on the
U.S.
screen.
Law Shield members, they can call the non-emergency line, and the U.S. Law Shield independent attorneys have all written travel guides for their state. They call, they can get a travel guide written by the lawyer in the state that tells them how to carry their guns when they're traveling to each state.
Love it. That is priceless, having that, because gosh forbid, as Mr. Reeves was said, you put the bag on the conveyor belt at the airport, and it's like, wait, I forgot. No, too late. Excellent advice. It's the kind of advice you get when you are a member of U.S. Law Shield. Join 470 some odd thousand other folks who are members of the leading legal defense for self-defense program in America. Coming up, we'll get to answer some of the questions that you've sent in with our independent program attorneys, Emily and Richard in Texas. But first, traveling, Dr. Rick Hamasfar has travel safety health tips from him. He's an MD. Check it out.
U.S. Law Shield Emergency Hotline. What's your emergency?
Crime doesn't sleep, and neither do we.
Summer approaching and the state's opening up, people are going to start traveling. So what can we do to protect ourselves while traveling? Well, let's check the CDC guidelines for a minute. First of all, they recognize the primary source of transmission is human to human, but they also recognize that it may be possible to get the virus by touching a contaminated surface and then touching your face. With respect to protection, they're recommending that people wear masks, do frequent hand washing, social distancing, and they are still recommending that you disinfect frequently touched surfaces. With respect to the mask wear, as you know, that varies by store, it can vary by state, and it can also vary by the situation. So if, for example, I'm in a situation where I can't maintain social distancing, perhaps a crowded hotel lobby, then I'm definitely going to wear a mask. If I'm around people that are immune compromised, sick, chronic medical issues, the obesity, diabetes, elderly, I'm definitely going to wear a mask. If I'm out in the open air and nobody's around me, no, I'm probably not going to wear it. So that depends on the state and it depends on your own situation. So a lot of this is just common sense. Now the TSA has made this a lot easier because previously you could only take a 3-ounce bottle of sanitizer. Now they are allowing you to take a 12-ounce bottle of sanitizer, which is the standard pump size that you're seeing. So that makes it a lot easier to travel with the necessary equipment. But what are some of the other things you should be traveling with? Well, basically, you need masks, extra masks I might add, extra gloves, you need wipes, and you also need Purell or some type of hand sanitizer. Except for the extra mask, which I keep in my checked luggage, I tend to keep everything else in my computer bag. But these are some of the things that you'll need, not only for yourself, but for every person in your party. So now that we have all of our supplies, and how do we actually go about traveling? Remember, the whole goal is to recreate that clean space that you have at home everywhere you go when you're traveling as much as possible. But let's face it, you can't do it everywhere. Airports are notorious. There's no way you can maintain social distancing and disinfect the surfaces, so we have to wear a mask and gloves while we're going through the airports. And you also have to do it while you're on a plane. And the routine that I follow when I get on planes is that basically I put the bags into an overhead luggage and then take the computer bag, put it on the seat or on the floor, and then go ahead and start cleaning. I get some wipes out. The first thing I do is wipe down the screen and the controls. Then I go on to the back of the table. Then I put the table tray down and clean that thoroughly. Go on to the seat belts, the buckles, and then the armrests and any controls that are in the armrest that I might be using. Then I go on to the window shade if I have a window seat, because I know I'm going to be putting that up and down, so I want to clean the handles on that. And then I finish off by cleaning the ventilation controls up above. So at that point, what have I done? I've been able to recreate pretty much a clean space right around me. So I'm in fairly good shape, but my gloves are incredibly dirty at that point. So I either have to change gloves or I have to sanitize the gloves before I get anything else out of the bag. Once those gloves have been changed or sanitized, then I can go into my bag, get my computer, books, Kindles, iPads, whatever, power cords, and I'm ready to travel. But here's what I want you to avoid doing. Do not use the pocket on the back of the seat. They're incredibly dirty. They really can't be cleaned. Whatever you put in there is going to end up dirty and contaminated. So do not use those at all. And that's the way I travel. Obviously, once I get to my destination, I pack things up, get my luggage, and I move on to the rental car company. When I go to the rental car company, I try to use an app to check in so I can avoid the lines, because I'm still in the mask, I have my gloves on, and I just want to avoid the problems of social distancing and waiting in crowds. Ideally, I can go right to the car. Then I take my bags, which are dirty at this point. I put those in the trunk, except for my computer bag. And now what I want to do is recreate that clean space inside the car. All the car companies have really increased the amount of cleaning that they're doing. This was a video from Midway that I found that shows what's going on. But basically, this is the routine that I've been following for years. Again, the only difference is I'm now using gloves. But if there's a surface inside the car that somebody could have touched, I tend to wipe it down. So rear view mirrors, gear shifts, the gear knobs, steering wheels, so forth, radio controls, all of that gets wiped down. Once that interior of the car has been completely disinfected, that is now a clean space as far as I'm concerned. That means I no longer have to wear gloves inside the car. I no longer have to wear a mask inside the car. So I get rid of my gloves because they've been dirty. I've worn them through the airport, on the plane, and to clean the car. I can take my mask off and save it. And now I'm ready to drive to the hotel. Once I get to the hotel, again, I check in with an app to avoid the crowds in the lobby. Put on my mask, my gloves, and go to my room. And then when I get to my room, I move my bags inside, and it's the same problem. I've got to recreate that clean space. And there's no telling whether or not the employees really cleaned the room the way they were supposed to. So I get my wipes out, and I go through, and any surface that somebody could have touched that I know that I will touch, I go ahead and disinfect. So I'm looking at the list here, the thermostats, faucets, door handles, all these surfaces get wiped down. Once I've done that, I then figure out where I'm going to put my bag. I lift my bag up and put it there, and I don't move it, because every time I move my bag, I have to disinfect the surface. So once I get all the surfaces disinfected, the bag where it is, at that point I get the mask is off, I take my gloves off. And remember, you always take your gloves off first, Purell your hands, and then take your mask off, because you want clean hands going up to your mask. You don't want dirty gloves, you don't want dirty hands. So take the mask off, and then at that point I can start to unpack. And the only part that I really do on unpacking is it deals with the DOP kit. And I take a bath towel that has been folded, and I refold it, so what had been exposed to the air is now on the interior of the towel, and the towel is folded so that the interior part of the towel is now the surface of the towel, if that makes sense. I then put my DOP kit on top of that. I never used any of the hotel glassware or coffee mugs that are in the room, because I really don't know how clean they are, or when they were cleaned, or the last time they were cleaned. And I don't put my toothbrush in those glasses or cups at all. I just keep it in the DOP kit. Then once I'm settled, if I decide I want to work out at all, I then research how often the gym is cleaned. Is it once a week, once every day? Is there deep cleaning done? Are there cleaning supplies down there so that we can wipe the equipment down in between use? Do you have to sign up for it? How many people are allowed in at a time? Is it possible to social distance? I want to know all of those things, because I don't know about you, but I don't particularly like doing cardiovascular in a mask. And I do want to be able to exercise safely. And if I can't do it, then I'm either going to exercise in my room or I'm going to exercise outside. But I research that before I actually go down and use the gym. And then finally, the last question is, what do you do about maid service? Because every time the maid comes in, I have to clean my room again. I really don't want to do that. The only thing I really need from a maid is I just need clean towels. And I can arrange to get the towels and discontinue maid service in the room so that everything inside the room stays clean. I don't have to clean it every day. And I would much rather just do that. So basically what I've done is I've recreated safe spaces everywhere possible, cars, hotel rooms, as much as possible within the plane seat that I'm on, and just protect myself in other areas. So if you can understand the concept, understand the tools that you need to meet the concept and make it successful, then we all should be able to travel successfully and have a very, very nice and healthy summer.
Curling my hair, staring into space in the most desperate of circumstances. Fred, darling, I know you can't hear it, but I love you. I love you, Fred. So beyond that
U.S. Law Shield Emergency Hotline. What's your emergency?
One call away, 24/7, 365.
Great advice for traveling from the doc. Now, let's get to the questions that you sent in. I'm Sam Malone, by the way, in Houston, proud member of U.S. Law Shield. Remember, join, become part of the family, become part of the leading legal defense for self-defense program in America by going to uslawshield.com and join. Let's get to our favorite, I've known him a long time, that's why I say that, independent program attorneys with U.S. Law Shield, both in Texas, Richard Hayes and Emily Taylor. Richard, thanks for joining us, sir.
Always, Sam. Happy to talk to you.
Great to have you aboard. Ms. Taylor, how are you? Welcome to the webinar.
Oh, I'm excellent. Thanks, Sam. How are you?
Outstanding. I'm vertical. I'm 5x5 and all the other phrases. Let's get to questions that have come in on our webinar about traveling, right? Because, you know, your driver's license, the weapons carry permit don't work in all states. It's not that easy. Let's just say, Emily, we'll start with you. I decide, due to the COVID-19 virus thing, to get a camper. I'm going to rent one for a week or two, and I'm just going to explore the highways. But I'm going to bring my gun with me. Or can I? What do I need to know, Emily Taylor?
Yeah, so in a camper, I mean, so of course we're going to talk all about traveling this session. I know there are a lot of questions that have come in about it. So this one I'll limit to the issue of, you know, you've got an RV and what does that mean for your firearms possession? And it's actually really interesting. So in most scenarios, what we're going to look at is when your RV is being used as a vehicle, it's treated as a vehicle. If it's being used as your home base, your stop, you're hooked up, it's going to be treated as your home. And so, you know, for the purposes of carrying your weapon, maybe there's no change at all, or maybe there is a change between those two. It depends on what state you're in. I'll give you an example. Texas. In Texas, when it's being treated as your home, you could openly carry a handgun in any situation you wanted. You could have the, you know, blinds drawn, you could have it laying out, it would be fine. Whereas in the vehicle, an open carry of a handgun is much more limited. You have to have a license to carry. It has to be in a shoulder or a belt holder. So your general rule is going to be when traveling, when moving, vehicle, when stopped, hooked up, down for the night, you're home.
Man, it's getting complicated. Richard Hayes, jump in. A former prosecutor, by the way, from the county of Galveston, just south of us. What do you say? I'm renting an RV and I'm bringing my, you know, my Beretta, my Glock, my SIG. Talk to me, Mr. Hayes.
Well, so I was watching the comments section and I kind of anticipated that this was coming. So RVs, I would say one of the more interesting issues, and this is going to apply to your state, is, you know, many states have a castle doctrine law. In your habitation, you get extra protections when you're inside of your castle. Now here in Texas, you know, your vehicle is also your castle. But I think a lot of us inherently, we hold the belief, hey, if I'm staying somewhere, if I'm using this place as my overnight accommodation, I should get an extra level of security. And that's where the castle doctrine comes in for a lot of these issues. Jurors understand that too, and they understand, hey, if somebody's sleeping overnight, they want to feel safe, and they're going to, I can imagine that's going to go into their consideration. If you're ever forced to defend yourself, defend your family. Another kind of interesting issue that comes along with RVs is just the extra level of protection from the government, because we have a heightened sense of privacy. We call it, you know, you feel like you should be secure in your persons, places, things. We have the Fourth Amendment. So you have that extra protection, that extra expectation of privacy in your habitation. And so, you know, I don't know if any of y'all watched Breaking Bad, but there's an episode where they shot bullet holes all over their RV and then they put duct tape over it. And when the government pulled it off, they said, well, that was a search. So, I mean, that it's a little bit of a joke, but that's a good example of you have a heightened expectation of privacy. You have extra protections in an RV.
Love it. Staying with you, Mr. Hayes, these are pre-collected questions. Let's see, Alex C. wrote this question. If the state I live in has constitutional carry, can I travel to other states and without a permit on top of that? Mr. Hayes.
A lot of states have no licensing or permit requirement to carry in certain locations, typically house, premises under your control, vehicle. So there are many states that, let's say they aren't constitutional carry, where maybe you would be allowed, if you're traveling to that state, to keep a loaded concealed handgun inside of your vehicle. For constitutional carry states, just be careful. This is one of those deals where you want to check the law ahead of time, because constitutional carry, about half of our states that are constitutional carry say, hey, this only applies to residents of our state. So if you live in a constitutional carry state, you don't have a license or permit to carry for whatever reason, or maybe your state doesn't even issue one, and you're traveling to another constitutional carry state, that's a trap a lot of folks sometimes get caught in, so be on the lookout for that.
Emily Taylor, jump in. Alex C's question was about living in a constitutional carry state and traveling to another state. What do you want to add?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, that was a really complete answer. I will just add that if you live in a state that's a constitutional carry state, the best reason to get your handgun license is travel, because you just can't rely, even if, as Richard said, even if you're going to another constitutional carry state, you cannot rely on that constitutional carry applying to you. So if your state issues a handgun license, perfect, go grab one. If it doesn't, I believe New Hampshire does not issue handgun licenses at all. They've been constitutional carry for ages. There are other states. Texas will issue you a non-resident license. Florida will issue you a non-resident license. There are lots of states out there where you can go ahead, get a license. It's completely valid, and it will help you when you travel.
Emily Taylor, independent program attorney in Texas, where I am. Let's stay with you. Tony A. has a question that I experienced personally when I went up north. While traveling, if I enter a place that requires me to wear a mask and I refuse, could that affect my gun rights? Emily Taylor.
Yes, it's absolutely possible. So essentially, in order to analyze this from a legal perspective, you can even take the masks out of it and say, if for any reason a property owner denies you entrance, you can deny entrance for any non-discriminatory reason. So I could say, Sam, I don't like your blazer today. Get out of my storefront. And if you said, no, make me, and you've refused to leave, then we have a criminal trespass issue. I have authority over the property. I've asked you to depart. You have refused to depart. And so if that constitutes an offense that could suspend or revoke your handgun license, which in most states, I believe it does, it certainly does in Texas, then you do have a problem. So then let's talk about the masks now. There's nothing different between the mask and Sam's blazer. But let's say they say, you can't come in here without a mask, and you say, I'm in here, I'm shopping, I'm not getting out of here. And they call the police, you have committed a trespass. It'll depend state by state whether or not that trespass is enough to suspend or revoke your handgun license and your carry rights. But it sure is a possibility, a likely one at that. Anytime a property owner asks you to leave immediately, fight it later.
Got it. $29 for a blazer, I'm getting eat. What's up with that? Right. Let me jump over to Mr. Hayes. Let's add to that, because actually I was up in Philadelphia. I couldn't even enter a hotel. They would not let me in unless I had a face mask. And I'm like, what? I couldn't even get into the lobby. So if I go, stick it in your hat and there's an incident, could this affect my gun rights?
Yeah, it absolutely can. And we've mentioned this in previous webinars. Some states, they say, hey, you can't carry with a mask on, like Washington, North Carolina, Illinois. And then you have some places where it really doesn't affect you at all. Texas here, the presence of a mask doesn't affect your carry rights generally. But like Emily was saying, we have this theory of trespass, which is really two things: entering into a place knowing you're not supposed to, so entry is forbidden, or remaining in a place after being told to depart. that's when you have a trespass generally. And just the same thing, if you have your house, and if somebody comes up with a gun and you don't want them in your house, you wouldn't be surprised if that person wouldn't be surprised, for example. So the same thing applies to private businesses, private property owners. The one thing I'll say for gun owners, though, is the presence of a firearm could elevate the level of the offense. So you have here in Texas, we have a Class B trespass under 36. We have 30.05 is our general trespass statute, but then we have 30.6 and 30.7, which elevates it with that presence of a handgun. So just gun owners, be on the lookout, because those types of offenses could cost you your license.
Amazing. Richard Hayes, independent program attorney, along with Emily Taylor. I'm Sam Malone. You're watching our webinar for U.S. Law Shield about traveling. Mr. Hayes, staying with you, we kind of brought up reciprocity a little earlier. Tom M. wants to know, before I leave for a trip, how do I find out about reciprocity involving his donation? Mr. Hayes, destination.
Well, I mean, I'd say the best source is going to be that state's attorney general, Department of Justice, or whatever their highest level law enforcement agency, Secretary of State, whatever they call it. It's going to be their website. They're going to have listed all the agreements they have with the other states. Maybe you have trouble parsing through it, but I'll tell you, I spend quite a bit of time every week talking to Law Shield members, and that's something that I think is an invaluable service. They call me, they say, "Hey, I'm going to state X, I'm going to state Y. What do I need to know?" I can tell them, what they need to know. And then they'll get connected with attorneys from other states, so they know once they get to their destination state, how do I need to carry in this state? Here in Texas, we have open carry if it's carried in a belt or shoulder holster. We got lots of people who go to Florida. They don't allow open carry. And that's one of those things that you need to be on the lookout for. We got people going to Colorado. They have magazine capacity limits. So, the only way to know is to learn the law in the state you're traveling. How much effort you want to spend on that, that's up to you.
Got it. Let me jump to Emily on this one. Rita, her question that was sent in: what if my travels take me through a Native American reservation? Excellent question, Rita. Emily Taylor, help us out.
It is. And that's actually one of the more complex questions we come across when people call us about traveling. And the reason is this: every Native American tribe is treated as its own sovereign entity. And so they get to make the rules. So even though they're located in New Mexico, Oklahoma, what have you, those state laws do not apply. And each tribe on its own gets to decide whether or not handguns, firearms are permitted. This is one of those things that gets complicated, and it's difficult, and you're preparing for a trip. And the last thing you want to think about is having to track down what tribal lands you might be going through and then contacting that tribal authority to figure out what their carry laws are. But that is exactly what needs to happen.
Wow. You're watching The Harsh Reality of Traveling with Your Firearm. I'm Sam Malone, your host in Houston, Texas. Let me stay with Emily Taylor, who's also an independent program attorney in our great state of Texas. I saw that some states have a duty to notify. Kevin A. wrote in on his question. What does that actually mean? Duty to notify. Emily Taylor.
Yeah, so we think about that in terms of if you have to display your firearms permit to law enforcement, and at what point you have to make that display. So there are really two different options here. One is upon demand, and the other is upon first contact, and they mean different things. And those are both your duty to display, duty to notify. If it's on demand, what that means is once an officer asks you to ID yourself, you must also present your handgun license, ID yourself as not only I'm Emily Taylor, here's my Texas driver's license, but here is my license to carry. I am also a carrier in Texas. That's on demand. We also have upon first contact. And what that means is an officer comes up to you, let's say it's not a traffic stop where the first thing he's going to say is license, right? He approaches you about an incident, maybe you're a witness, maybe you've called in. The first thing you must do is identify yourself as a licensed carrier and present that handgun license before he even asks who you are. Different states have different rules, and you just have to know which state you're going to, if it's upon demand or upon first contact.
Wow. Richard Hayes, independent program attorney, also in Texas. during our Harsh Reality of Traveling webinar for U.S. Law Shield. This is a lot to remember, Mr. Hayes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you being a former prosecutor, you probably come across these kinds of instances.
Yeah, and I will say 9 times out of 10, especially here in Texas, our requirements to get a license to carry are pretty high. We're a big law abiding demographic. We commit crime at a much lower rate even than police officers. And so I'll tell you what my procedure is when I get pulled over. If you can do so safely without, getting near your firearm, I take out my driver's license and license to carry at the same time, and I, hold it in my hand on my steering wheel. I will tell you why. Police officers, when they see that license to carry, they know, all right, this guy's passed a background check. It's a huge sigh of relief. They know right there instantaneously, because before they approach your car, they don't know who you are. And, these situations can flip like a light switch. But when they see that, they see the license to carry, they say, all right, this guy's passed a background check. I don't have to worry as much. I see that they're one of the good guys. And so I would say 9 times out of 10, police really appreciate it if you have that stuff ready for them, especially your license or permit to carry. And that will get you a long way, I'll tell you that.
Love it. Pre-collected questions for the harsh reality of traveling with your firearm. Mr. Hayes, we'll wrap it up with you before we get to Ms. Taylor. Eric, you wrote in, what should I do if I am stopped by law enforcement and they are not aware of the Safe Passage Act? What do I do, Mr. Hayes?
Well, James Reeves kind of touched on it earlier. Like he said, if you rattle that off, they might look at you like a dog watching television, as my law partner likes to say. So it's one of those things where if you follow all the rules, you're allowed to possess the firearm in your home, where you're starting, where you're ending. You're passing directly through. That means you're not making detours or delays. The firearm is inaccessible, unloaded, locked, stowed. Even if you follow all of those rules, you can still get arrested for a state gun crime. Let's say you're passing through New Jersey. Like I said, they're not going to know what you're talking about if you say safe passage. You're going to get arrested for a state gun crime. But at your trial, you will have this powerful protection of the Firearm Owners Protection Act, this safe passage provision at your disposal. And that's where the law applies. Unfortunately, it comes after you've been dragged through the legal system.
Man. Emily Taylor, final thoughts, independent program attorney in Texas.
Yes, my final thought to Richard's point is, remember, even though you've done the right thing, the officer is either misinformed or quite possibly malicious. If you're in a state like New York or New Jersey, you must stay calm, cool, collected, because that video from his body camera, from his squad car, all of it is going to be shown at your trial. And you never, ever want a jury to think, man, maybe he had a defense here, but we just think he's a jerk. We just don't like him. Because juries are flawed humans like the rest of us. Even when you're being abused, stay calm, stay polite, stay respectful. Let your lawyers, because we are the bad guys here, let us be the bad guys, and we'll do it with vigor.
Well said. Emily Taylor, independent program attorney, U.S. Law Shield in Texas, and Richard Hayes, independent program attorney in Texas. Emily, thank you so much for joining us on our webinar.
Thank you.
Mr. Hayes as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sam.
A real wake-up call, the harsh realities of traveling with your firearm, and that kind of wraps things up. Here's the deal. If you missed it, it'll be there so you can watch this webinar in its entirety. Bottom line, what are you waiting for to become a member of U.S. Law Shield? I've been a member for years. Wait, ready? Woo, there you go, swag, baby. Become a member. Go online to uslawshield.com. Remember, the leading legal defense for self-defense program in the country. As we have said a couple of times throughout this webinar, you as a member will have 24/7, 365 attorney-answered emergency hotline access for you. Independent program attorneys in your state, experienced professionals. And of course, there's the other great benefits that members get: FaceTime with independent program attorneys, instructors, there's member-only events, there's training, there's range times, there's discounts, and more. Become a member today of U.S. Law Shield. In Houston, Texas, I'm Sam Malone. See ya!